Hey everybody, this is Perch. Would a Marvel DC crossover work to generate excitement for comics? Several of you will write in this idea from time to time as like this is the only thing that's going to really make comics explode again. To have Marvel and DC crossover, like way back in the amalgam days, or the days where you would see occasionally a Marvel DC crossover. Um, I don't think it would work. And when I say work, I guess I should explain what I mean. Would some people buy it? Like if Marvel and DC spent a year hyping up the idea that Marvel and DC characters were going to cross over and there was going to be an event and they were going to battle each other or whatever else it was going to be. The challenge is I think it would people would buy it. I think you could probably pop, 4 issues, 6 issues, however long this whole thing was going to be. You could probably get 80,000, maybe 100,000 in copies, which don't get me wrong, that would, be a lot of comics. But to put it in perspective, you know, if the goal is to sell, I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. Events, if they sell 100,000 copies for each event issue, that's good. That's a top selling comic. Everybody's happy. But really, what it also needs to do is sell 20%, 30% higher of all the tie ins. So it needs to create an umbrella effect where the entire line rises. And if you're Marvel and DC and you're gauging the success of an event or a crossover or a summer campaign or whatever it happens to be, how you're going to determine if it was successful or not is how much crossover appeal it had. Because the reality is, sub like the Spectacular Spider-Man, the comic with Miles and Peter both in the same comic, that's selling 50, 60,000 copies. And so, okay, if you look at that saying, all right, we got one comic selling 50,000, 50,000 copies, let's say, and our cost of goods were 10 grand. Let's just keep it simple. So 10 grand of cost, 40 grand of sales, we have to, of course, sell some margin in there, whatever. You're talking about 40,000 copies sold times $4.99 for the cover cost. That's what you're going to make. Cool. If you're going to go to all the trouble of a Marvel DC crossover and it does 100,000 copies of sales, well, that's equivalent to two 50,000 copy books, right? 50,000 times, or 50,000 plus 50,000 equals 100,000. So two Spectacular Spider-Man books equals one Marvel DC. Is it then worth doing a Marvel DC crossover, or you got to get lawyers involved, you got to figure out the rights, you got to split it between both companies? The trade paperback sales are going to be confusing and convoluted unless you really get a good contract in place. All this kind of stuff, it's not worth it. If you're Marvel or DC, you're better off just trying to figure out two comics that could sell 50,000 each and call it a day. Because any kind of crossover you do is going to be so unnecessarily complicated that it's just going to eat up your profits before you even get to the finish line. Or at least it's a lot of hassle for very little return. That's the problem with a crossover. If it was a Marvel and DC crossover and it sold 1 million copies, then you've got something. But the problem is that's not really where Marvel and DC are at, unfortunately. And it really is, unfortunately, the idea of having Spider-Man beat Batman and have a team up or a fight or something, that should be 1 million copy seller idea, but it's not. A bunch of reasons for that. That comic's going to go into the direct market. It's going to go into a local comic store. So thus only comic fans are going to notice. If you think about it, if you put into a Target or a Walmart or, a place where people go for just general goods, and up at the register, there was a little, stand and it said, hey, Spider-Man fights Batman. Kids are going to go nuts for that. Like, especially if it's pretty good art, on there, and it looks like kind of an exciting, whatever kind of battle they're having looks pretty cool. If you delivered something like that and you had it out on the newsstand, you would sell 1 million copies for sure. But if you're stuffing that in the local comic shop, look, you're selling to a and I'm going to use a wrestling term here that all of like five of you will understand. You're selling to a smart audience, meaning you're selling to people who know that nothing is really going to happen. Spider-Man is not really going to definitively beat Batman or the other way around. There's no real stakes here because these two companies are competitors. Therefore, it's a exhibition match. It's basically a match where very little is going to actually occur because nothing can occur. At the end of the day, the genie has to go back into the bottle and it's gotta end exactly where it began. That's unfortunately where things have to wind up. And so, that's the problem with a Marvel versus DC crossover is that everybody involved in it, all of the fans, all the customers, know it's basically just an exhibition. It's not a comic that is going to matter long term. And that's its downfall. Um, if you want to make that comic work, cool. It would be good, but then you've got to have stakes. You've got to sell it outside the direct market, and for better or for worse, you've got to sell it to kids. Children have to be in on this title because they're the only ones who are going to really believe that this event or whatever it is you're doing matters on any real level. Otherwise, everybody knows it's going to go back in the box. But I don't think, at the end of the day, I think if Marvel versus DC, the comic, came out, then I think at best we're talking about 100,000, maybe, copies sold. And then you're talking about, maybe some crossovers, but every crossover you do, you got to split between the two companies, and that's going to be problematic. And so I don't think it's too complicated. I also am not sure what that comic would accomplish. Like if you had Marvel and DC, look, I have fond memories of Amalgam. I thought that was fun. The various little things that they did. But, you know, a year later, did any of it matter? What was there any lasting consequences from Marvel versus DC the comic? There wasn't. It basically came and went. And today, if they did Marvel versus DC, is that going to impact the Ultimate line, the Absolute line? Is it going to impact the X-Men, the Avengers, any of that? It's hard to imagine that it would. It's hard to imagine that any of this would have any lasting impact. So really, it's up to you, the fan. Are you interested in this exhibition? Comics are about the suspension of disbelief a lot of the time. And so if you're going to buy Marvel versus DC, you're going to look for things like, Quicksilver and the Flash are going to have a race, and we're going to determine who's fastest. And, in a battle between Spider-Man, Batman, who's going to win that battle? Or, if you're going to have, and I don't know what the various, exciting team ups that you'd have between both companies. If you're going to have Deadpool meet Harley Quinn, who's going to annoy you the most? But the reality is there isn't a really satisfying answer to that question because neither Marvel or DC will really want to show any ass in this situation. And so you're going to get battles where there really is no victor, and it's designed that way because nobody can truly win. I think comic fans would know that. I think anyone buying this in the direct market knows that's the way it's going to go, and therefore, you're not really going to get anything when all is said and done. That's a very cynical way of looking at it. And I guess the more fanboy, exciting way to look at it would be, hey, wouldn't it be cool to see, Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel on the same page, written by Kelly Sue DeConnick, doing something. But for me, I'm like, it's going to make some crude joke. I'm like, are they scissoring? I'm kidding. There's plenty of fan fiction around that. But my point is like, you've got to do something meaningful with these team ups, or they're just going to kind of come and go and nothing will really happen. I'm really curious in the comments below, if you can, explain to me what would you be looking for in a Marvel DC crossover, and why do you think it would sell a bajillion copies? I don't see it. I don't think there's, again, would it be a high seller? Sure, in the context of the direct market, but it wouldn't be a high enough seller to put up with all the bullshit that would go along with putting this comic out. So, Marvel versus DC. Do you think it would work? Do you think it wouldn't work? If you do think it would work, why? What's the big thing that you think would sell it to audiences? That's what I'm curious about. Let me know in your comments below. Like and subscribe if you care. And thanks for listening.